Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining. If anybody has any question or conversation, I'd like to try to keep this completely and totally conversational. So please feel free to chime in or ask questions or at any point. And so I was just mentioning, so the whole Modern Apps learning site and all it's all hosted on GitHub pages, and it's powered by GitHub Actions right now. And every feature is a GitHub action. And so when I enroll, it's a GitHub action. If I take a test, it's a GitHub action that runs on the back end, et cetera. And so the initial rollout of those features was very much a rush job. I mean, this is very much like very, the actions that are running now are far from good quality stuff. It's more like a prototype that happens to be in and it works well. I mean, the system overall doesn't have very many problems right now. It has a lot of potential problems though, right? Like a lot of things we didn't set up. Really need to get a lot more improvements into the system, ideally with time. So that was kind of the intent: build the platform up to a point where it actually runs, and does, and then together as a community, try to get it from where it's at to best practices, which I really love, because I think, one of the things I've noticed is every single real world environment, every single environment where someone is going to be implementing this stuff, none of them are perfect. They all have legacy. Everybody's had constraints. Everybody's had, old things that were not built well. They have new things that they're forced to do that they don't have the appropriate support and resources. They just got to get it working and then pulled into the next thing. And then if you look at most documents from most vendors, they're here's a perfect state. It's not easy to find training that, like, here's something that's ugly and messy like we see in the real world, and let's have the opportunity to experience to see how to take that stuff and piece by piece get it towards where it needs to be. So yeah, so one of the main goals we have right now as a community is to improve on thing. I am going to be on paternity leave in if we're on schedule sometime mid-March. I'll be out for 4 months, and so depending on what everyone else wants to do, these calls may go on hiatus because I won't be available, but we'll see what happens. I don't know if someone will want to carry the mantle, but either way, the program will go on, and I have some folks on my team helping to support will be helping to support the program while I'm out. But between now and then, trying to get things to a point where we have it as manageable as possible. And so, being that things were thrown together fairly quickly, there's a whole lot of manageability things that were not implemented well. And I think the biggest of which is we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 780 independent repositories under management, and each one with a corresponding GitHub site. And I do not have any meaningful usable central dashboard of things like, people could open up an issue ticket potentially on any one of these 750 sites. And there's always the intent to have a solution for that. It just hasn't been implemented. And so, and there is no centralized dashboard for going in and seeing, okay, how many, let's see a central list of issue tickets that exist across all the sites, or pull requests that maybe open across all the sites, etc. That kind of central dashboard view. Now, what we do have is GitHub notifications themselves, and so individuals can subscribe to all of these things. But when you have so many sites, that methodology quickly overwhelms you. As I found, if anybody has tried to open a pull request that or an issue ticket that may not have gotten attention right away, that is one of the things that we've run into from time to time, because we don't, it's very difficult for me to find sometimes when somebody opens an issue ticket, depending on how it's done. I try to keep an eye on things, but there's still always some that I'll find that I'm like, wow, how did I miss that one for 3 months? I've been like coming through and looking at these particular things, and here's somebody I didn't get back to for 3 or 4 months. Oh. And it happens. So as one of the big things is getting those central dashboards built, and then some cleanup of the existing assets. Have really good central logging. It's one of the nice things about using cloud native platforms is they do actually, there's a strong benefit from taking what you know today, taking a new systems and bringing them together, even if you're not an expert. I think it's one of the hard things is like, well, there's a lot of new stuff out there, and we want to be doing the new stuff, but we don't have experience in it, right? And sorry about that. And so how do we get that chicken and egg scenario out of the way? So anywho, let's get further into that. So I've been talking about getting a getting some sort of data grid, a list of all this stuff. So how would we go about doing that? And so there's a few different ways. We got to think about client side, and we got to think about how we're going to do it on the server side. And so let's look at our client side environment first. And let's go ahead and look at setting up how we're going to set up the environment for this. And let me move my monitors around a little bit so that way I can see my desktop. So all the features run on GitHub Actions right now. And so GitHub Actions work by provisioning a virtual machine every time that a function runs. And so they only run on demand. And so for example, someone enrolls or someone registers with the community, they open an issue ticket, and I have a GitHub action that is monitoring certain issue tickets with certain labels, and an event will trigger when that issue ticket is received, and then the GitHub action will run that does the registration process for the user. That GitHub action, every time that event triggers a GitHub action, GitHub spins up a new virtual machine. So GitHub Actions are virtual machine based. Of course, containers are a first class citizen. And there's one of the interesting things about virtual machine based versus purely container based. Like Tecton, for example, is a purely container based system. Is purely container based CICD systems. It's faster to do it the container way, and it's nice. But then what happens if you need to do things like build containers as part of your workflow? Those primitives are still maturing. So I think at some point, purely container based CI/CD systems will completely dominate, because those abilities to do the classic difficult things that were used to be difficult to do in containers, like building containers from within containers. I don't know if there's been a lot of evolution in how that's done from a security standpoint, because historically we would allow privileged containers to run that could have access to like a Docker engine inside of the container environment, and use that to be able to build containers inside a container. And now there's actually really properly secured new models that are available with container runtimes, and container, the actual act of using a container or building a container from within a container. There's some really good new stuff there that is displacing a lot of the hacks that were originally done for that type of environment. But nonetheless, GitHub Actions is based on it runs a container, and it's like a fast clone. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they spin up some type of fast clone virtual machine. And then it for every single workflow run that is run. So in that earlier example of when someone registers with the community, they open an issue ticket, it triggers a GitHub action to run. And for every individual person that does that, a GitHub Actions will set up a independent VM. So every workflow run gets a fresh, clean environment. Now GitHub Actions, JavaScript is the first class citizen in GitHub Actions, but that's not that's not necessarily any indication that you should or shouldn't use JavaScript with it, as a primary programming language within a GitHub action. It just means that there is a native JavaScript runtime with GitHub Actions, but there's also a native container runtime in preloaded in these virtual machines that run, and so really anything that you want to compile inside of an action is fine. You can use any language you want to build actions, and just you have a, when they run, they can build, whatever. You can have a pre-built artifacts from any language. It's just a really standard. Anything you can do from a command prompt, you can do inside of these actions. Let me share my screen. And I'm going to do desktop 2. And so just a reference. I know not everybody has seen these. Let me just show a little bit about one or two of our actions here before we get into how we're going to work on these. So in any given repository, your GitHub stuff, like actions and configure, any type of settings and configurations for your repository files, needs to go in this .github folder. As you can see, I've got issue ticket templates here. That's one thing that would go in this folder. Another one is if you're using GitHub Actions workflows. And here we have a couple of our different workflows. And you've gone through a different, it's kind of interesting things about how you would name and organize GitHub Actions. So one of these is named by the event, because I don't know exactly what the best practice is, because you might want several different things to happen based on an event trigger. Some event happens, what needs to happen. Now, if several things need to happen based on some event, do I create a individual workflow file for each of those things that need to happen? Or do I put them all in one file? And there's advantages and disadvantages to doing it either way, but ultimately within GitHub Actions, if you want to control the order by which your workflows might run after an event triggers, it seems like the best way to do that is to put any actions in a file, or at least to have a primary file that would call subsequent actions. Is the only way to really control the order by which GitHub Actions will run. If you have a particular trigger, like this case, the merge event, a successful push to a repository, and you have several things that want to run, the only way to really granularly control that is by putting them all in a common workflow. And so I have some of these named by the thing that they do, and other ones named by the event that they're based on. And I haven't decided really in terms if it's always best, because there's some scenarios where one way versus the other way seems more optimal, where say the order and the significance of the exact explicit order in which they run on when an event happens isn't as significant. So if for what it's worth, but let's say, so we have here things like what happens when any new push is approved for the repository. That's in this merge event. And then we have if somebody opens a new issue ticket, what happens if there is a change. This one is triggered on the changes to organization memberships, like a new membership is added or a member is deleted. That is in a native event type that is provided by GitHub. And then I have one here that's purely functional based on what it does, right? Send tweet. And so this is a manually run action that would allow, say, people who are working on a project like a GitHub repository to maybe have a way of sharing a Twitter account. So if multiple people want to help promote that or help support an official account, an action like this is one way that several people could use a shared account. That's what that's there for. And so the first one, I think we'll look at the first thing. We're going to start with how do we enroll in one of these sites. And so right now, the initial version of these is all bash, and it's all really sloppy bash. And there is, I rushed through these and then mostly in the middle of the night. And so there's not the initial effort. I didn't really put hardly any effort at all in these initial ones to not repeat myself and to properly parameterize things and to put things into functions and call functions and do things you're supposed to do for proper code. And so they're very kind of disorganized and sloppy right now and aren't well documented. So I want to get these to a state where we get them in a workflow, and we'll start to clean these up to identify, okay, I have a lot of code just kind of splayed all over the place here, and we want to figure out, what of these should be put into reusable functions and parameterize, and so that way we're not having a lot of these are several hundred lines long. This one's one of the shorter ones, and it's kind of very difficult to follow because they're sloppy and not well organized. And so I did not build a flowchart for these. And so that may be a good place to start with the refactoring effort here, is coming up with what the flowchart should look like. And I think it kind of highlights some of the challenges with them right now are that, you see, as we look through it here, if I wanted to create a flowchart just to know what they're doing, even me who wrote these, it's like, I got to sit here and think about this for a while. Why did I do this? Why is step 2, we're in step 2 and not step 1, and all of those things. And not well annotated, like you can see here. Okay, curl member record file. That's nice, but why exactly am I doing it at this step? Now, I know this because it's fairly obvious in the sense that well, we'll need the member records for something, and maybe for several things, most likely for several things, and so that's why it's up front. But there is no really great organization. Like, it's nice to see that we're doing, gathering some of our props that we'll need to run in the workflow towards the beginning, as we should, but there isn't I did not fully honor any particular pattern like that. Like, let's put variables that we need to declare or properties we need to gather at the first part, and stuff like that. So this is all, we should be, having this, as a practice of, we're going to start by gathering the props that we need, the variables that we need to, since it's part of our process of declaring our dependencies and variables towards the beginning of the workflow run, and having that all kind of appropriately gathered here near the top of the file. So it's good that we've got this curl member record file, but I'm sure if you'll see that as we go through this, there's a combination of, let's get a dependency, prepare my variable, and then do something, and then we'll go back to get a dependency, declare a variable, do something, and it'll be just very randomly strewn throughout, based on, like I said, these were kind of just bootstrapped together. So build something, and then as I got into, somewhere down here, I was like, okay, well, I'm still building on, and things just fell in the place where they were in that bootstrapping order of things, rather than highly organized. So let me pause again, and just a reminder, any comments, any questions, any feedback as well, all that stuff, anyone can feel free to unmute, comment anytime. Okay, so let's just get a sense for what this is going to do. Now, before I actually look through it line by line, let I say, so what I think, we should expect to see here, what I know that this does. So the main thing that I think we're looking for here in this ticket, unless there's some other thing in here that I've forgotten about, is that actions that we would invoke based on an issue ticket opening. And the main one that I think of is the community registration. Now, notice these workflows are associated with each repository. And so this is our homepage. So if you go to modernapps.ninja, it is this repository that is backing it. And so there's other different types of workflows on different repositories. So if there's a course that I went to look through, the course enrollment, there might be something with new issue tickets there, and it may have a similar type of idea, but it's not going to be the same. So what we'll see at the homepage, what functions will run on the homepage when a new issue ticket is opened on this repository, and that should be primarily or only when a new user registers with enrolls with the community, registers with the community. that should be the main focus of this job. So what it should do, so what happens when a new user registers to the community? The user opens an issue ticket, they submit the issue ticket, this event run triggers, and it should go gather all the information that about that member or whoever submitted the issue ticket. It should create a file based on the user's data on another GitHub repository, and then that's and then what it does is it makes an API call to GitHub to have an invitation sent to that user. So with GitHub, like if you're going to join somebody's organization, I have to have the GitHub send you that invitation, and that user has to accept it. Like I'm sure there's ways programmatically to where if I built a front end application to handle this instead of doing it through GitOps, then it could, the user could say, I authorize GitHub, blah, blah, blah. But we're doing it a little bit different way because we want the users to use GitOps in this case, to be able to do things. And so, it's just a little bit different flow. And so that way, when that ticket is received, it goes through and it triggers GitHub to send a request to the user. So then that user will have to then go to their email address, click yes, I accept that invitation. And when they do that, that'll trigger a separate process that will finish building out their user registration. So user registration is kind of, from a workflow perspective, is a two separate workflows. And so let's see if we can see that. So the first thing, we're going to gather the member record file. So this must be to determine if the person's already a member, primarily because there isn't a member record file yet in the case that someone is registering for the first time. And so my first step, I always do review event details. This is a great way to get all of the context. So if you have to go in and you look at a GitHub action that run and you want to find out, maybe you're troubleshooting something or anything like that, by showing, so if you see here, I see like this event.json file. Every time any GitHub action runs, it creates this file and it has all types of context there. We have a dependency here, YQ, and we could see there's probably multiple dependencies in this list, and it's a really nice thing to declare all your dependencies up front, right? But this here is one dependency that I'm installing, and it's not next to other steps. So this is an example of disorganization. We should have all the dependencies needed for the workflow run here. And then we're going to gather our member record file. And actually, we take one step back. So in GitHub Actions, right, you can run multiple different jobs, and then within each jobs, there's multiple steps within that job. And that's one thing I didn't neglected to look at first here is this is the first job. It's checking a duplicate. So I can tell from that context here, this curling member record file, the primary purpose of this is to confirm whether or not someone might already be a member and it's an accidental duplicate. And so I can go past this job to see what the next job is. And now we can see here, this is the new member invitation. So in the first part here, this check duplicate job, that's all it does is check for duplicates. And that's another example of being repetitive. Is this is not the only workflow where I have to do something very, very similar here. So whether it is cleaning up the steps within this particular workflow, but also how we call this workflow. Because right now, you can see here, I have just this whole job kind of statically pasted in here. And the main purpose that we're actually doing here is this new member invitation. And this is sort of this prerequisite step. What we could potentially do here is have this job as a separate isolated file. And then have a new member invitation, make a call to that separate file. So we're not maintaining all of this text, because if there are any other jobs that need to do something like this check duplicate, right, then what does that mean? I'm going to have to take all this text and paste that into another separate GitHub action. And then when it comes to actually maintaining, this code here, or improving this code, then I would have to improve it in a whole bunch of different GitHub actions all over the place. And so it'll probably be most ideal for us to take this job and make it a separate file, and then have the actual new member invitation process here call that separate file. That way I'm maintaining the code for this chap duplicate function in one place, and I can lifecycle manage it. And then if I have several different jobs, several different tasks that need to run this, they'll all just call at one central place, and it'll be a lot easier to manage and run. But for the first part of checking duplicate, let's check the logic there. So we're going to say curl the member record file, and it's going to, let's see, so make a curl, and then it's going to create a file based on the response to that curl. And then we're going to say, we're going to create a variable with the set remember curl cat record curl name. What is this cat? So the response is in this file called raw member curl. And then we're going to display it, and I'm going to look for the name. Okay, so we're going to use JQ. So when the response from our API, our GitHub API here, is going to, as REST API responses usually are, it's going to be in JSON. And so we're going to look here to see if there is a name field in that response, and then pass it into a temporary file. And then, so for troubleshooting it, I have it echoed. Or no, this step is how I will create a environmental variable in GitHub. So the GitHub Runner is a pretty standard virtual machine, and most of the things you can do in it are just like what you would do on a command line on your Ubuntu box. It's by default, it's Ubuntu-based virtual machines that run this. But one of the big differences is how you create variables. There's some things there to try to implement, make things more secure, essentially. And so when I want to have an environmental, so each different steps, they have different, they're each like in a different shell instance, if you will, on the same host. And so if I want my variables to persist globally across my steps within a job, I need to pass them into this GitHub env namespace. And so if I want to create a variable, now I can create a variable just like I'm on a bash prompt within any given step. But if I want that to be essentially like a global variable that works across all the steps in my job, I've got to pass it into the GitHub in. So I create a record that should be blank, essentially, if there is no name, which should be the norm, or not blank if there is a name, right? So, and then I pass that into then I say, let's say, check if it already exists. So basically what we're going to do is, you said, if we got a response back from this, and I didn't set this as like, it could be something where I'm like, is there anything there at all? Because I believe in any case, there's going to be some response to the curl that we make to see if the member record file is there. The big question is the response an actual valid response that indicates that the user does exist? And if it is, then it will have a name field, whatever response is there. If there isn't any actual record, then it won't have a response with a name field. And so this variable here will end up being completely blank if there is no member record, and it will otherwise be populated with something if there is a member record. So now that we've created this variable, we're just going to do a simple if statement that's saying, in this case, we just for extra security, we'll say, is the name that was returned the same as the user that submitted the ticket? And that's one of the nice things about using these your GitHub Actions and users interaction through GitHub is when someone submits this issue ticket with their member record, it's a text file. They're saying, what's your name? What's my first name? What's my last name? What's my email address, etc. They put that in the file that they submit when they submit a new issue ticket event. However, how do I know that someone is actually submitting their own data? it's secure. They're not, someone's not doing something on behalf of another user, or, cheating on a test, or, trying to prank somebody by signing them up for something they didn't want. And so we take information that they provide in the text file, and then but the action itself, we've got, so right here we have this namespace, these variables that are provided by GitHub workflows or GitHub Actions workflow, saying the GitHub event user login. This is the user that submitted the issue ticket, period. So whoever, because when you submit an issue ticket to GitHub, you have to be a logged in user. That's a GitHub thing. And so every time anyone submits an issue ticket, there's always a user login. So we're saying we're kind of validating. We curl users' information based on the detail that the user provides, and then we check that against the user login itself. And then we create a variable called is this duplicate or duplicate, and it can have a true or about a false. And if this is duplicate, if they're already a member, then we don't want to continue running this flow. So let's see now, why am I cloning? And here's another thing with the documentation, right? I'm sure as I read through this, I'll figure out why at this stage I am going to clone the repo, I guess, hopefully. So let's see. I think, yeah, we're cloning. So why are we cloning this? And fortunately, I remember why we're cloning this. And it's kind of an esoteric thing. And one of the things that explains why we need to have documentation, because there is a good reason why we're cloning this, but you'd never guess if you didn't know. Like, why would we clone down the repo just to be able to, like, we already know if it's duplicate or not. Well, it turns out that some of these actions that we do to issue tickets are a lot easier using Hub CLI. I forget, there's some couple very specific actions that are not easy to do without the Hub CLI. So GitHub has two different CLIs. There's the GH CLI and there's the Hub CLI. And for the most part, I use GH, but there's a couple things that Hub does that are very difficult to do outside of Hub. And I think one of them is transferring issue tickets, if I remember correctly, because what we want to do is at some point in here, I think we transfer the issue ticket to a central location after it's closed, because these issue tickets have, the user registration data, and I don't want to leave them in all this stuff is findable from, and nothing is hidden. We don't have secret databases. We make that clear to users when they register. Don't put anything here that's secret. But I do try to put when people give me their email address, I don't want our site to be one that some web crawler is going to go and pull lists of people's email addresses from the spam. I still want to put them in places to where they're at least disguised or not easily crawled for marketing purposes and stuff like that. So I do take the issue tickets and I transfer them to a separate place, so that way they're not all just in one place and easy to probe for people's data. And so yeah, Hub makes that a lot easier than any other method. But to get Hub, the easiest way to get Hub the working that I want it to is cloning the repo down, so that way Hub is sensitive to the folder that it's in. So if I'm in if my CLI is navigated to a directory where there's a particular repo, Hub will understand that and it will run its commands based on. And so I'm cloning this repo here because it makes it easier to use Hub, right? And which the only reason I'm using Hub is because it's the easiest way to transfer an issue ticket. And so all that, again, great reason to have things well documented, because there's no way that anybody would ever look at this. So somebody needs to maintain this without me here and know why the heck that this is happening, right? So identifying, again, more things that we need to clean up here. So I think, on the bright side is the nice thing about this job here, this little job tech duplicate, is it's a pretty simple action, and it's a great action to get started on from a refactoring standpoint, because it's really short. It's only 69 lines here. I don't know, wrong. Maybe this could be 12 lines. I don't know. Not that 69 lines is necessarily the shortest or as short as it should be, but I think it gives us a reasonable space to try to find to do a little refactoring project here. And so we clone the repo, we create a hub config file. And this is another one here where there's a lot of different steps in different places where we might need to create this hub config file and use hub. And what happens if I need to change any one of these? How many different places am I possibly using this step? So this would be another example of a function that we should create that handles the process of creating a hub config file. And rather than having this code here, we should probably have this set up to where I've got a function that runs, then the function is saved in a central location, and the step just feeds that function and gathers the result from it, rather than statically typing out the thing. Because if I want to change this, or if I ever have different things that need to create a hub config file based on different input values, I've just got this the code that makes up that step just kind of statically there, and it's just echo files, and I don't know. It's not that big of a deal, but it's one of the things we could use to refactor this. And then what do we say? If the duplicate request is to append message to issue ticket and close issue ticket. And this makes me wonder, am I even transferring this issue ticket? Because here I can see here that I can update, I'm updating the issue ticket and I'm closing the issue ticket. Here it is. Here's the transfer. This is the reason why we're using Hub, because it's make an API call to update or to close a issue ticket, not hard. There is no API call to transfer an issue ticket. It is something that's only possible to do with the GraphQL API, not the REST API. So GitHub has both the GraphQL and a standard REST API. And so you got to use, and Hub uses that GraphQL API to make this possible. Now, I very, very much want to get comfortable with GraphQL and making native GraphQL calls. I think it's just a really exciting area. But that another bridge for another day. And so using Hub to get that need to transfer that issue ticket. And so we can see I've got an org called admin private, and any member of the Modern Apps Learning community can choose to navigate this admin private and see what's there. The data is not really private per se, but again, that helps to keep it from any type of crawler or individual that might like to try to go in and get a list of members' email addresses or something. It makes it to where not just any random person off the internet can easily find that all in one place. And and so this is our first workflow here. Let's see, what time is it? 8:40. So maybe one of the first things we can do here is to put this into actually create a little flow chart from this. So I'm trying to think which flowchart software do I want to use. I'm always divided as to if I want to use Miro boards, or let's see if I think I've got a good one in Miro here that I'll use. Do sign in with Miro. So any questions, comments, discussion points, feedback that's interesting for people? Like, I always feel like this is, why'd I put Gmail at work? I always feel like this is maybe a little boring, but at the same time, it kind of fits the nature of the call potentially, right? Is doing actual SRE stuff. It's not always exciting, but it's all stuff that nonetheless we have to be prepared to do, because as for the same reasons we have to do it now. It's like we get into the job, and there's all sorts of monotonous things that we've got to do. Can't skip past. That's one thing that's interesting is I recently switched from how did I put cache? I can't tell. Okay, there we go. Sorry. I recently switched from Windows to Mac, and I find it interesting that the way we have things set up, I don't know if it's a difference between Windows and Mac policy stuff, or if it's just a difference of how RIT has implemented it, but you have to enter your password 1,000 times a day on a Mac, and you don't on Windows, which begs the question why that is, because it seems to me kind of a disservice to Mac users. If it's truly about security, then yeah, nonetheless, I'll let that one go. Okay, now where's my boards? I should get owned by, here we are, owned by me. Let's just look at this as a reference here. I don't know if this is a swim lane diagram that I made for something else not so long ago. This is probably, well, it's not, I don't know if you call this swim lane. Is this, I don't know exactly. So one thing about gesture mice, can I pinch zoom a gesture? I'm getting used to this Apple mouse where you can has some gestures you can do on it, but not others, like, which makes sense because it's not as large of a surface. But it's kind of interesting because I'm like trying to pinch it now, and the pinch zoom is apparently not something you can do on the mouse. I have to figure out how to use these things. Okay, I think I got this. Okay, so issue ticket end-to-end workflow. Oh, so I do have is this may be even the one I was working on. Interesting. So is this, let's see if this is what, I didn't realize I had a flow chart that was assigned to this. Okay, so this is something I never finished. That's why. So let's see, what does this say? User selects issue ticket type from the template that apply to the corresponding label. So that's one of the points that I didn't really go over, is that when someone creates a new issue ticket to become a member of the community, almost nobody can actually choose to append their own labels. Labels are really, really useful for doing a lot of automated actions. And because of that, it's kind of important that you don't just let anybody append their own labels, because they start appending labels. That's a great way of hacking, because you can trigger all types of things that happen automatically if you put the different label. And so you do have to have I forget the exact, I think at least triage level of permission in the GitHub permission hierarchy before you can append labels. But what you can do as an admin is you can create templates for your issue tickets, so that if a user selects they want to do a template, such as like the new member registration, they get prompted and select that template, and the template itself appends the label. And so, yeah, the label is the first thing that we're going to be concerned with. And this is apparently, I forget what I created this for, honestly, because this is not for the same thing, but it'll be a good template for us to maybe create. So for whatever this, what was this one for? Automated issue ticket opening. I don't remember what this one was for, but I said we'll just use this as a template. Let me see if I can duplicate this. Let's see. Let's duplicate that. And let's call this like, I'll call this malp dash malp, in case you're running, you see that in different places, is it's Modern Apps Learning Platform, which I kind of like hesitant to even use that term, because it's the way it makes it sound like we're creating some official learning platform. But I mean, it is for the Modern Apps Learning site, but it's not anything like, we're not trying to create a software asset that, like a real VMware software asset or anything. It's really just for the learning environment. So that Modern Apps Learning Platform, what is the name? Where did it go? What's the name of the issue ticket? No, that's not it. Here we are. This one is new issue ticket. Okay. Malp new issue. And create a copy in the same project. Well, I don't have these organized by projects, so sure, why not? Okay, so here we are. Now let's see, let's replace some of these with, I'm just gonna, let's see, so I was trying to put these in the lanes. So what are the lanes? Initiate new ticket, assign issue type label. And yeah, I remember what this is. This is for like any, this one was for initially for any tickets that we went manually review. In this case, we're gonna go through and we're gonna look specifically, hone into the case in which our label is met. So if we look at the code itself, no, not that one. Where did it go? I need to get rid of all these tabs. Why do I have so many tabs open? Yep, here we are. Here's where we were. So we can see here, this runs every time that a ticket is opened, but the jobs that I have running here will only run if our GitHub event has a label that says new user registration. And likewise, if I go over here to my .github, I can look in issue templates. I can see these are all the different templates, and one of them is join request. And if I look here at this join request, it's going to say this kind of defines our template. So we can see our template looks like this. This is what people will see when they open the issue ticket in the body of the issue ticket message. And here's the metadata that will be the metadata that is associated when any user opens up a ticket based on this template. It includes this label, new user registration, right? And so go back to our workflow. Ticket event. And so we can see here that while the overall workflow will get triggered anytime that any issue ticket is opened, we'll put the filter for that on the actual jobs themselves. So the first job, the check duplicate has that filter if it contains new user registration. And for the second job, this new member invitation, we didn't need to do that because I put here that this needs job tech duplicates. This will only run the second job will only run once the first job is completed. Now, the GitHub Actions does support parallel job running. And that's the reason why I put this needs here, because this prevents parallel running of the jobs here and ensures that these run in order by having the check duplicate. And so by inheritance, we ensure that the this new user registration was checked before the new member invitation job runs. Okay, so let's go back to our Miro board. The one here. So user selects issue ticket. And then we're not going to actually go through basic labeling routing. In this case, we're going to say case. And we'll say, we'll just do like a key value pair for, how should I pin that? Well, let's do this label. I'll do it like a little JSON-y here. And well, let's do this. Case label equals new user registration. That should be done in accordance with a particular well-defined standard, but it's close enough. I think that'll at least get us until maybe later we want to come in and make that a little bit more consistent across a whole set of diagrams. But for now, that'll do the trick. So in the case that the label is new user registration, we'll just say something like, I'm trying to think what standards did I use for what this shape means. This is a user selection, admin reviews tickets is required. So I'm trying to see, did I have the difference in the shape here that I'm using? I forget what exactly each different shape signifies in standard flowcharting, but I'll ignore the shape for right now and just get the basic flow out of the way. So let's start to see, we want to say here that let's see the job. Let's say new user registration workflow filters new issue. So I'm going to make this verbose a little bit right now because I'm sitting here like thinking I should just word this super elegantly, but it might be a little bit wordy because my just thinking is coming out in my head a little bit wordy. New user registration workflow filters new issue tickets for new user label. Okay, so that's the first thing that happens in the sequence. And then the next thing, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this whole tab over here next to it. That way you don't have to keep looking for where the tab is. So the first step is to review event details. That's not even an action step. And I guess, you know, I want to diagram this based on what needs to happen, not based on exactly how it is. So let's say the first thing we want to do is install dependencies. So let's say now I'm actually thinking we need to change this from that case label. What this needs to be is the check duplicate job, right? So let's call this whole section check duplicate because that there's only one step for the way I was labeling it before, which doesn't make sense to label whole section according to that. So we'll just call this whole step check duplicate. That's a fairly simple job and keep it in one lane essentially here. Okay. And so we said the new user registration workflow, and we want to start off by like install dependencies. And I'm just going to delete some of this other boilerplate that was here. I'll get rid of that. Okay. No, I didn't mean to do that. So we're going to install dependencies. And after we install dependencies, let's just say get. So any type of property that we need to run to create populate variables, we want to gather those. And then we want to, I get, I don't know how explicit I want to be. If I want to say declare variables, which kind of implies getting external props, but let's just be very explicit here. And I'll call those out as two separate steps since they are essentially two separate steps. We're going to get our external properties, any type of property that we want to gather, like our curling the member record file, right? That's going to be a way that we're actually going to gather an external property. And then we're going to say declare variables. I'll come in and add detail to this of the specific thing we're doing in this specific workflow. We're just going to scaffold out the overall steps. So we declare. So the first thing we do is we install YQ, right? And then we curl that member records database. We're actually gathering external properties at the same time. Then we declare the variable. I mean, this is actually pretty close to the line of what we're doing, right? So we look at this, right? The first thing that we're doing here is installing our dependency. We're gathering that external property. Then we're going to set our primary variable that we need for this workflow. So then we're going to declare our variables. Now, this step is a little bit out of order, right? And so in this case, what is this modernappsninja.github.io repository? It's a dependency for the workflow. So we really should get this. And so you can see how, like, I think putting this in this order in some sort of visual flow chart and thinking about it in terms of, like, when we think about this in an abstract context. When we start to get into the details, everything gets muddy, right? We leave the details out of it, and we kind of leave it at this higher level of what do we want to do at the beginning, in a good script or a good program. Oh, we want to get our dependencies and our properties and our variables declared all at the top of the script, and kind of thinking about it at that level helps us get out of the mud and make sense of the actual workflow itself. So now I can see, now that I've thought about that, I can see, okay, now I'm getting into this next step. What is this? Oh, this is really back there and gathering that dependency. So that gives me a hint as to, one of the things that I can do to help improve this workflow as I'm refactoring it. And then the sub configuration file, so that's it. So actually, you notice I didn't actually have to download and install Hub. Because Hub is actually present already in the GitHub Action Runner. If you're using a default GitHub Action Runner, what's a runner? I mentioned, right? GitHub Actions uses a virtual machine every time you run a workflow. And that virtual machine, when it gets instantiated to actually do a run, we can call that in shorthand a runner. So it is the virtual machine environment that gets run every time the GitHub action is triggered. You can create different runners, but the default GitHub Action Runner already has Hub in it. So there was no step to download and install. But then we have configuring a dependency. So here we have a dependency, but this configuration isn't even for our workflow, right? This is how we would configure the dependency itself. So I still think of it as part of that initial install dependencies. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Where do we configure dependencies as opposed to install them? Well, let's just go ahead and add another step here. Do we want to configure dependencies here? Do we want to configure it after? We probably want to declare our variables first, right? Because that configuration of our dependency might actually need a property or variable to declare to be able to do it properly. So let's go ahead here and I'll create another step called configure dependencies. Okay, so we'll say so now we've got that. Well, then after we configure our dependency, now we have our actual business logic right here. If the duplicate request is true, and then append the message and close the ticket. If it's not true, now normally, like, we don't really have to do anything if it's false, but we do have to create this variable. As if we look at what are we going to do when we decide to continue running this? What if somebody is a duplicate? We're not going to continue to run something if somebody isn't a duplicate. So what we do to actually we use that information to determine if we're going to continue on with this workflow into this next job, right? And so we have this if statement on setting up and sending a new member if the job check duplicate outputs output 1 equals false. So we start here with 2 different jobs in our workflow, right? Our first job is job check duplicate. Our second job is job new member invitation, right? So this job check duplicate, the whole point of this is to create this output. So we define here in our header of this job that this job is going to create an output. Now, every variable that you declare, there's kind of a couple layers of variables, right? If I just say, var, and I declare a var inside of a step, that variable will be isolated to the context within that step. I can also do this method that we saw where we're echoing the variable to the GitHub environment. This will create your variable that has this, and we'll call it job scope, right? So it will be global essentially within the job, but not across the workflow. So in that case, I probably want to hesitate using the term global, because usually global will refer to at least what exactly does global refer to? Like, I think with this context, we'd be talking about across the whole workflow, right? But we're talking about its scope to the job. So when you do it like this, it will be available to every step within a given job. But if I do want to pass data to another job, I've got to define this as an output. right? In the header of that particular job. And so when I create that, I have to define as output. So one of these steps will create this is duplicate, and we can see down here in this, we're going to say if duplicate request is if and this duplicate is true. So that's not where I set it. Where do I set it? Here we go. Here's where I set it. So I still create the is duplicate variable the same way I would if it was a job local variable. The only thing that I do to indicate that it is a variable that I will pass as an output from this job is in the header of the job. I've got to put the outputs, output one there, and that will indicate that when I create this variable, it is going to be one that is passed. Now, any other variable that I create in this first job will not get passed. I have to define it as an output in order to pass it to another job. All right, so we create so our business logic in this first one, the whole point is to create this is duplicate variable. And then after create that, our other key piece of business logic. So the first part here is we want to, if it's true, we want to append a message to the issue ticket and close the ticket. So that's important. If it's false, we need to make sure that the environmental variable gets explicitly set. So that way, when the next job determines if it needs to run or not, it can just quickly check that value. So here we'll explicitly set our value. And then the last thing we will do is transfer. So really these three steps here really represent our business logic. So I could come over here into my mirror board, and we'll just call this one I'll just say here business logic for now. I need to come in and fill the details, but I think that probably puts us to the top of the hour. Oh, we're already over the top of the hour. So thanks for hanging out. I was not looking at my chat. Apparently we've got some chats that I missed. Need to drop and got to go. Yeah, I had a comment from Rick about design thinking. We need to have better standards for how we do our boards and diagrams. But yeah, that we'll stop there for today. I'll continue on with this and share the additional details, but we're well into refactoring one small part of one of our workflows. So a lot more refactoring to do ahead of us. Hopefully that is a helpful little look at refactoring. But one of the nice things I like about it again is it shows you can take the knowledge that you have. You can use a new cloud native type of tool, like a new CICD system like GitHub Actions, which is very similar to other CICD. If you know how to do some sloppy bash right now or something like that, you can start there and you can put it into one of these systems, and it helps you take steps towards the goal of arriving at a perfect cloud native place. You don't have to be in the world of like, I have to have the perfect knowledge and the perfect installation of a cloud data system in order for it to work well for you, right? Like it's always ideal. It's never easy to come back and do refactoring after you've got something going, but it's absolutely something you can do. You don't, we're all under pressure. We got to get some things up and running. We gotta step into things, even if it's just for our own understanding. And so, yeah, it's absolutely possible to start with what you have, to bring your scripting knowledge into a modern CI/CD system, and it will help meet where you're at. And it gives me nice things like, I didn't really have to think about logging as much just to get it off the ground, because, and it's still manageable, at least for me, because I can go into the GitHub, the logs essentially that GitHub Action provides, which is every single different run that gets run. I can go back in and see that just like I was sitting at the prompt executing it myself. And so that gives me a lot of flexibility into how useful this is for me. And it gives me a really nice benefit. I can be I can off-put, I can still have things that are manageable while improving them. So thank you everybody for joining. I can hang around for a minute if anybody wants to have any further questions or discussion.
Sorry, appreciate the walkthrough.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Art, thanks. Fascinating.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Paige.
See you later.
Have
Bye.
a good one. thanks for joining.
Yeah, this was cool.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think I jumped on one of these in like 3 or 4 months because I got a real job too. But
Exactly right.
yeah, this was fun to see, and I haven't done Github Actions before, but I totally follow that, and I got enough crappy bash chops that I can. So yeah, are you doing this all on your own then, or is that?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Like there's a whole lot of interesting things that have happened over the years because we started off. I started off as PKS Ninja, and the way that we started off really brought in a lot of participation and contribution, and so we were really a very active contributor community initially, and that's always been the goal. It still is the goal, but we've had a lot of learning lessons and probably more than anything else, political headwinds that have constrained our decision making to where now it's not a very contributor centric site. Like that's the whole goal is it. But I think we're trying to make a strategy and make some changes to get back to that goal, because I think one of the big things that happened is we were initially focused on the same, like if you think, if I want to get people to contribute, what's the easiest way to do it? Well, who's already building the type of stuff who's out there already taking their time to build this type of stuff, and it's people like the experts and stuff like that. They're already out creating and sharing technical blogs. And so we were very much targeting that community very directly at the beginning. That was all the content that we had, and we had all types of things to try to cater to the audience of people who would. I think there's a really important synergy between content contributors and active participants. Like if you create a community that only has content contributors, it's not a good community because everybody is very busy working on their own thing and finding review and feedback and community participation. And so it's really nice synergy to have not just any participant who comes and looks at a web page and runs away, but somebody who wants to actively participate, provide feedback, be in the game. You get those two together, it's a really nice synergy for the community. So we had all that, and then at one point, we added courses, and the intent was to just have the courses as an extra icing on the cake, keep the focus a lot on the more lab guide centric content, very similar, vExpert type of content. And, you put the course out there that says Tanzu 101, and that got us a lot of attention from executives. And they really liked that there was somewhere that had a course called, Tanzu 101. But at the same time, who's not interested in a course that says Tanzu 101? vExperts, right? They're off working on, topical, whatever they're working on now. So that ended up consuming pretty much all my time. And so now we kind of ended up in a state where it's like, well, we've got these courses and the executives like the courses, but it's kind of a mismatch where I want to be. I want to be at the place where people, with the people working on topical stuff, as once somebody does the 101, they move on. Right. And they don't want to hang around in 101 land forever, constantly maintaining an old 101 guide. We want to keep on working on whatever we're working on. And so that's where like kind of the community at. And I'm trying to work on ways to move us hopefully more in that back towards that direction of focusing more on topical content, sort of lab guides, vExperts. I don't mean to say vExpert as, I know not everybody's vExpert. I like it as a categorical term. I don't mean actually vExperts. I mean people who are, doing similar things.
Right, you want a wide swath of expertise. You don't want just newbies, like you said. But
exactly, you need to have people kind of across the spectrum, and definitely want to have newbies, because it actually works out to be, when we were PKS Ninja, it was the results we got were just kind of astounding. I think we maintained some community assets like a lab environment. It was a one cloud based lab environment, but we maintained it very aggressively and everybody was using it. And it turned out to be, when anybody wanted to use PKS, this was pretty much the easiest way. So we had people were like myself, and a bunch of people were using it to do things unrelated. Like, my job says that I need to test out this new feature. Okay, well, the easiest way for me to do that is grab this lab environment and then I'll go test it out, or I'll go record a video. And when you did that, you actually had the same exact lab environment as everybody. And so if you wanted to share your scratch notes with everybody, or if you wanted to say write a blog, but have the ability to have people follow along with you easily. And turns out that's a headache for everybody who does this, right? Because we want to share about feature X, but we can't share somebody information about feature X unless they know how to replicate our lab environment. And so then everybody who's out there writing blogs about this stuff, that's, you can see it's a perpetual challenge. I don't want to spend all the time talking about how I build my lab environment, but if I don't share enough, then nobody can follow along with me. And
Right.
so it's just a
Yeah, they can't get to the same starting point if they don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've done a lot of work and then you say, now let's pick it up from here. So
Yeah. What ended up happening is we ended up massing 30 or 40 lab guides or so. And we made a relatively simple lab guide format, but it was consistent, but lightweight, easy to do. And you needed not a lot of bureaucratic overhead. And what would happen is someone would create a lab guide, and all the lab guides were tightly coupled to our specific lab topology and versioned. And so it might be running PKS 1.2. And then say PKS 1.3 would come out. I'd say the new template's out. We've got PKS 1.3. Now we got 30 lab guides that we know worked on PKS 1.2. Will they work on PKS 1.3? Probably. Most of them won't even need a single change, but we got to know. So let's have a little hackathon. And
yeah, that's where I got involved. Was I was kind of running
you're-
through those, just sanity checking,
all right, so yeah, you were I never remember who was involved at which stage.
No, I'm
I'm
but
yeah, and I just every single one of those every single one. So it got to be where somebody who wrote a piece of content could write it and know that it would be maintained. That's, I think, is great. No, everyone who's writing content would love for that to be the case. And we all know it's like, I would love to maintain that old stuff, but I've got to move on to the new stuff. And that kind of helps solve it for me. So I really want to get back to, that being community more being like that. It's just politics all the time to deal with all types of political headwinds. But I have a strategy for hopefully improving the political situation a lot in the very near future. So we'll see.
Oh, good. Doesn't involve this paternity leave thing, I think. So,
yeah. So we'll see. I mean, everything's up in the air always, right?
Right.
Like it's just because consolidation's a real thing. There was never an intent to have, we always want to be very community centric, but I never wanted to be the only community. I just had certain things like, well, the other communities aren't doing things like the way that I want to do. But like, I'm talking to VMUG, who desperately needs help in establishing some community of their own, and they will have a community one way or another. I'm like, that would be a nice synergy, because I'm so constrained by political headwinds, and we have people threatening now. Oh, you're not an official VMware GitHub. Your domain name says Ninja, and that's potentially offensive. No. You've got to do 101 courses, even though it doesn't make sense for your audience. Like all that stuff. I'm like, if the thing about VMUG that's nice is there's like 3 people that work there. And so if I can convince, one, and there's only one person I really need to convince, if I can get one person that this is the way we should do things, and I can easily get support in my current role to do something jointly with VMUG,
right.
then I can tell, VMware policy wonks that come and say, oh, well, your logo looks sideways or something, then I can, you didn't use the right font type, this one has, your call to action, the text next to your call to action button on your website has to be in all caps, yeah, I get all this crap from them. Like, no, let's just bypass all of that. And, so that's my thought right now. So I'm meeting with VMUG people. I may move the whole program under VMUG ownership, keep it exactly the same. We still do certain things the way that we want to, but then have a nice thing to help us shield us from the bureaucracy.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I'm even interested. Just looking at what you were going over today, it's like this is the kind of stuff I'd like to start playing with and get some chops in that too. So. I mean, I don't know if you're looking for other people to help you work on this.
That's the whole point of everything. And it's hard right now because it's not happening, right? Usually, especially back when it was happening, people would join and they'd say, okay, there's people doing things. I know where I'm invited to participate. And so the intent is supposed to be, yeah, absolutely. Anybody could come pick up anything. Hopefully someone will sign up tomorrow and they'll look at some problem and be like, there's a problem. Maybe I'll fix that.
Yeah. Yeah, like you,
So-
I mean, you presented something pretty basic here. Is like, let's take this, is this a duplicate request and put it in its own function and
Mhm.
call out there and start refactoring that way, or start looking at what duplicates you have in the code. And
Danny,
things like that,
sorry,
right?
one second.
You
Sorry about that. My daughter's headed out for school, so I
oh yeah, I'm on the East
Bye.
Coast, so I'm about to head for lunch. So
awesome. No, thanks for and unless it feel, I'm always down to chat about whatever. If you have any ideas, thoughts, questions,
Yep.
anytime on Slack or whatever else, doesn't just have to be during these meetings.
right. Okay, cool. Yeah, and I'm gonna start poking around in there and see, just look around and get comfortable with what I'm seeing. Because like I said, GitHub Actions is a new thing to me, so I'm intrigued, and I'm gonna do a little.
It's pretty fun stuff. I enjoy playing with it, and everything's free. So when you go to Modern Apps Ninja, I don't pay $1. Well, I pay for the domain name, the
Right.
DNS hosting. But other than that, everything's all free. GitHub Actions runs 100% for free.
Wow,
GitHub Pages is 100% for free. Which is
it's not like GitLab
kind
at
of
all.
pretty cool.
Nice.
I'm like, if I ever thought, like, if I ever ran my own business, the amount of stuff you think about it, it's like, what actually needs to be private on a website? I mean, if you're building web content, it is inherently, public content unless you're calling an API. So that's always backend anyways. So it's like anything you'd want to put, in a front end of web application anyways should inherently be public. And GitHub Actions, as long as the public site are free, I think that kind of makes people think it's like, oh, well, if you're really going to do GitHub Actions, you'd probably end up having to pay because you would really need it to be private. No, you wouldn't. What needs to be private? What needed to be
Yeah.
private is something that I ran on behind some API on one of my own servers anyways. But everything else, it never needed to be private. It's
That's
getting
pretty fun.
downloaded to the customer's browser.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's
I even have like the workflow. I don't know if you saw that workflow. I transferred the issue ticket to a private repository.
yeah.
Where does that action run from? It runs from a public repository. So even though I'm putting something into a private repository, now if I ran that action on the private repository, there's potentially a cost associated with it, or at least a limit.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
But now I'm like, if I manipulate my private repository with workflows that run on public repositories, there's no potential charge associated with those.
Yeah.
So I can
That's
save data that I receive.
hilarious.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anywho,
All right.
I
Well, thanks a
will,
lot.
I appreciate it, and
Yep.
look forward to collaborating with you more.
Yep, that sounds great. I'll let you know. All right.
Thanks, Joe.
See ya.
Have a good one.